Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley reporting from Washington, D.C. It's the early afternoon of Friday the 13th of June, 2014. And we're watching these little arrows indicating the spearheads of the ISIS brigades move across northern Iraq under the command, of course, of the new Guderian al-Baghdadi. The difference, of course, being that this time it's largely an imposture. It is to a significant degree, a dog and pony show, which unfortunately threatens to go very real. Baghdadi, like so many others, like Kumu in Libya, like Shihi or Shiri in Yemen, Baghdadi is a graduate of the U.S. military prison camp system. As a matter of fact, he got a 4-year degree. Baghdadi was held in Camp Bokka from 2005 to 2009. And if you look earlier this week, in a rather timely way, I must say, I have an interview from last Saturday morning with Press TV precisely on this, that Guantanamo Bay is a training school. It's a military academy for terrorists. And let the same be said for places like Abu Ghraib and Camp Bokka and other such places. So Baghdadi, the previous founder of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, now the founder of, or the boss of ISIS. Now, concerning ISIS, this is actually a misnomer. It's really Islamic Emirate of Iraq and Sham, okay? So Islam and Sham, of course, what the Arabic for the Roman province of Syria. So Islamic Emirate of Iraq and Syria, if you will, IEIS. But let's go along with the normal usage. ISIS is easier and quicker to say, and people tuning in late will get the idea. So what is this? Well, we have, of course, been following the existence of death squads in this critical area, Mesopotamia, the Fertile Crescent, over to the Mediterranean, for many years. And it goes back to Negroponte, the architect of the death squads in Central America, moved over to Iraq, and his disciple, Ambassador Ford. So these characters have been working away on that for the past 7 to 8 years or more, and now we're seeing the fruition. Specifically, the overlord, the warlord of the ISIS, Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, another way to put it. But ISIS, the boss of this is Prince Abdul Rahman al Faisal. And this is not just anybody. Prince Abdul Rahman al Faisal happens to be the brother of Prince Saud al Faisal, who is the long-serving foreign minister of Saudi Arabia, and a guy that I knew in college. My heavens, he graduated from Princeton in 1966, member of Ivy Club. We never saw him. He was always skiing in Switzerland, of course, but probably had somebody writing his term papers and so forth. But Prince Abdul Rahman al Faisal is the brother of Saud al Faisal and of Prince Turki al Faisal, who has been the Saudi ambassador to the United States, to the United Kingdom, and is a prominent guy. So this is a rather important branch of the Saudi royal family, and that is the command structure goes back to these Saudis. So the idea is a joint operation. We have to be careful with this now. See, we just do the ones that we know are immediately involved. Is the United States, certainly, France, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey are indispensable for the operation that we're seeing. So the Islamic Emirate of Iraq and the Levant, or ISIS, in Arabic it sounds like Daesh or something similar. This is now sweeping across northern Iraq. And just like the Guderian episode, you have to ask yourself, of these military units that are melting away, how many are doing that deliberately? How many have been bribed? The U.S. has been bribing Iraqi generals going back to the first Gulf War of the 1991. And remember that Guderian's success was not all due to Guderian, but to the fact that General Hunsiger and General George and some other of the French generals that were facing the Ardennes breakout, a lot of those were defeatists. A lot of those were Vichy within a couple of weeks. A lot of those were people who said, better Hitler than Léon Blum of the French Popular Front. You get the idea. In other words, the political quality of those troops means a lot. And since that force was bribed and created by the United States, we really have to wonder why they are melting away so fast. At any rate, what we're seeing, therefore, is a planned destabilization. And we've got now this idea that a vast zone of terrorist rebels stretching from the eastern suburbs of Aleppo to the western and northern suburbs of Baghdad have now fallen under this ISIS. This is now the reason that's being given for all sorts of shocking developments. Obama just made a statement on television, getting ready to fly off to a meeting in California with American Indian activists, and he wants to go slow. And I would commend that. I would commend going slow. Being impetuous and trying to cater to the likes of John McCain will get you nowhere. I would recommend for people, take a look at the short article that's available on the Voltaire Network, Iraq under attack by U.S., France, Saudi Arabia. Again, Turkey is indispensable in this, and the other one about how it's this Prince Rahman, I guess we can call him, Prince Abdul Rahman Al Faisal, ARF, ARF. Abdul Rahman Al Faisal is actually the commander, and then his military guy is Baghdadi, 4-year degree from Camp Bokka. And you'll notice the entire coverage is anti-Maliki. The U.S. hates Maliki. Why? Maliki is a friend of Iran. Maliki is a satellite of Iran. And remember, going back to WikiLeaks, some of the WikiLeaks documents were designed to make Maliki look bad. Why? To make Alawi look good. Iyad Alawi, the eternal U.S. candidate to be the dictator of an anti-Iranian Iraq. That's Alawi. And yesterday on CNN, we had the ineffable Amanpour boasting that she had been talking on the phone with Alawi or meeting him in person in London. And he recommends a national unity government. So the idea is if this emergency is used to create a national unity government, that would then correspond to a weakening of the pro-Iranian side and a strengthening of the U.S., British, NATO puppet side. And that is, of course, possible. The Iranians are responding. The Quds Force, elite troops of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, are reportedly intervening in northern Iraq to shut down these characters. Because it's clear, as soon as ISIS meets serious military resistance, they're going to be revealed as just a bunch of crazies riding around in pickup trucks with machine guns on the back. So that is the idea. We'll be back in just a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Yesterday, the 12th of June, was the Day of Russia, the Russian National Day, equivalent to the U.S. July 4th, the French July 14th, and so on down the line. A very nice reception at the Russian embassy. Just two things to note. The churls, the ill-bred, dishonorable churls of the State Department did not send, as far as I could see, anybody there to congratulate Russia. Mm. And the D.C. police let a bunch of pro-Ukrainian demonstrators get very close to the door, and these characters had the gall to say if you were going into the Russian reception, you were a fascist. How about that? The pot calling the kettle black. Not only are they fascists, they're actually Nazis. Forget about fascists. The people supporting the right sector and so forth in Ukraine qualify as absolute neo-Nazis. So I don't see what happens here with the D.C. Police Department. We'll be looking into that. The other thing I would mention, take a look at C-SPAN. My research indicates that that lecture that I did at the National Press Club September of last year is now the most popular Civil War item in the C-SPAN video library, going back to 2001. The only one in the entire history of C-SPAN, the only item which seems to have more views than my lecture is something by old Shelby Foote from 2001, which was an in-depth. They gave him the whole afternoon, and he gets to spin out some very interesting tales. But other than that, mine is number one. And, of course, once mine is up there for 12 or 13 or 14 years, maybe I'll be closer within striking distance of Shelby Foote. So certainly, as far as the sesquicentennial is concerned, I have to console Doris Kearns Goodwin and James McPherson and many others that I am the most watched Civil War scholar and lecturer on C-SPAN. So do take a look. Make that number go up. But now back to the Iraqi front. You get the idea. If U.S. airstrikes are ordered, then that will allow the U.S. to establish air superiority over northern Iraq. That will mean no more logistical support flights from Iran into Syria. And the interesting thing is, at the height of the crisis on yesterday, we had the White House saying, none of this will interfere with our plans to help the moderate opposition in Syria. The moderate opposition is gone. As far as I can see, the Free Syrian Army has just about ceased to exist. Many of them have fled. Some of them are in Sweden. There is no more Free Syrian Army on the ground. General Idris seems to have fled. He's apparently in hiding. So who are they giving these weapons to? It's obvious they're giving them to these crazies, and they're doing it with the cooperation of Saudi Arabia. Fareed Zakaria today, commenting on the speech by Obama, says, we're going to have a situation where the U.S. will be functioning as the air support for the Iranian Quds force. Well, Fareed, maybe you didn't notice, but your proposal for Syria was that the U.S. Air Force would have been the air support for al-Qaeda. So I think we're rather better off being the air support for Iran, if it comes to that, which I hope it doesn't, But just to follow his paradox to its idiotic conclusion. So all of this prepares new moves that are anti-Iran, anti-Syria, and with the booty, money, and goods, military equipment, the ISIS can transfer those back into Syria and try to mount something perhaps against Assad. Otherwise, Assad is triumphal. Assad has run a successful election that compares quite favorably with elections in Afghanistan or in Ukraine or anywhere else in terms of turnout and the number of votes that he got, with the honesty and actual independence of the opposition candidate. All of that seems to reflect very well on Assad. So Assad goes from strength to strength, and this is a desperate move to try to cut it off. Also notice, this ISIS has been based in southern Turkey, and one of the things we pointed to last year with the Ghouta fake chemical warfare scare was that what had probably happened was that a force from ISIS had crossed out of Turkey and attacked the Syrian province and city of Latakia, over there in northwest Syria. After that, this ISIS force appears to have been transferred across southern Turkey and then into this area of Raqqa being the far northeast province of Syria. So you get the idea. We call for no bombing, stay out of this. Rather, tell the Saudis and the CIA and the French and the Turks to stop doing this. Just stop it, right? Stop it. That would be the right thing from Obama. Now, concerning McCain, McCain shows that not only a coup in Iraq, right, toppling Maliki and bringing on Alawi and a group of Western puppets, that is part of the deal over there. How about a coup here in the U.S.? The coup faction, we know who they are, right? It's always Petraeus, 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 embodies Bonapartism, coup, putsch, you name it, in the U.S. And we know that group around Kerry, Samantha Power, have called in Petraeus and General Keane from the Washington Post of some weeks ago to try to find ways to attack Assad. Looks like we're seeing one such way right now. So McCain yesterday, in a raving speech on the Senate floor, McCain says, first of all, fire Dempsey. Yeah, Dempsey is Obama's hand-picked general, right? He's the general who protects Obama from the insubordinate putschist officer corps we seem to be developing, or factions thereof. He wants Dempsey out. McCain says, Obama, fire your entire national security team and bring in who? Bring in Petraeus, General Keane, the two warmongers that are already working with Kerry and Samantha Power. Petraeus and General Keane, of course, the guy from the Institute for the Study of War. And once we've said these names, Petraeus and Keane in particular, as well as McChrystal, are heavily implicated with the Kagan family neocon warmonger network that includes Newland, but also Frederick Kagan and Kimberly Kagan. Kim Kagan, we saw her on television this week, a somewhat disturbed television presence, but that's another story. And McCain wants Monster Mattis, a well-known, a militarist, I guess we can say is the nicest thing we can say. So McCain says, get Dempsey out, fire everybody, fire, I guess he means Kerry and Rice. Some of these should be fired, but not in the way that McCain says. And then he says, bring in the victorious generals, the people who know what to do, Petraeus, Mattis, and Keane. And he also wants to bring in Ryan Crocker of the State Department. So that would essentially be the coup that I've been warning of, right? The whole business with Bergdahl was to soften up Obama for this stuff, because these characters, if you replace everybody around Obama and control the options, then you control Obama. So also think about the OAS against de Gaulle at the end of the Algerian War. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C., Friday the 13th, 2014. Now, we're going to have a very interesting guest for you. One of the highlights for me of the recent Left Forum in New York City was a chance to meet up once again with Robert Fitrakis, Professor Robert Fitrakis, Bob Fitrakis of Ohio, who for many years has been one of those standing guard in that critical state where the presidential election is so often decided against vote fraud, voter suppression, and the attempt by the Kasich regime to bust all the unions and deprive all kinds of workers of their union rights. And you remember that was an attempt that worked rather better than the attempt in Wisconsin. And Bob was a leading member of that. So we're 2.5 years from the presidential election. We're a little bit less than half a year from the congressional election. So we wanted to start having periodic updates featuring Bob Fitrakis and some others about the question of vote fraud, right? Because if you're going to have a permanent austerity dictatorship by the Republican Party, one part is union busting, the other part is voter suppression and the limitation of the franchise. So Bob has recently attracted international attention. We want him to tell us about that and give us an idea, at least an introduction that we can then enrich week by week, month by month. So Bob, welcome. It's great to hear from you again.
All right. Great to be on your show.
So tell us, I understand that you've got people from the Middle East interested in the danger of vote fraud in the U.S.?
Yeah, I did an interview with an Iranian news service, and unlike the American news service, they actually read the documents, which is always a good starting point, because we at the freepress.org, as you know, and just like with your research, we actually traffic in public records that can't be disputed. But we get very little notice here. But they were concerned. What we came up with December last year, we found the actual contract that was leaked to us. I went to my office at school. Someone, no doubt retiring from the state with a conscience, put the contract on my desk that showed 14 months before the 2004 election, the J. Kenneth Blackwell, the co-chair of the Bush-Cheney campaign and the Secretary of State, had contracted with a man named Michael Connell, who died in a small plane crash in 2008. But Michael Connell was their IT guru, and he was in three major scandals, the 6 to 20 million missing emails in the Valerie Plame affair, the firing of the U.S. attorneys, and the strange, funny numbers that were outsourced in Ohio. He put together this system, and it was a mirror system in Chattanooga, Tennessee, in the old Pioneer Bank building. It was a server farm under the name Smart Tech, run by a former right-wing evangelical preacher named Jeff Averbeck. And essentially, they allowed it to be remotely controlled. It's all in the contract. So the voting was sent in the wee hours of the morning down to Chattanooga, where it appeared the results of the 2004 election were reversed. So instead of Kerry winning by 3% in Ohio, Bush wins by 3%. And those numbers correspond to when the vote was essentially outsourced. And the contract called for all private contractors. So private contractors, and we know this pattern, ran the election in 2004 in Ohio. And, they're more interested in Iran, Russia, Germany, Japan, and Al Jazeera news than they are in Ohio or the United States.
So the entire second term of Bush was due to vote fraud through this network.
Yeah, no, and it's quite obvious if you follow the pattern. I know you wrote that excellent biography on his father, but the first computer vote fraud is manifested in 1988 in the New Hampshire primary, where Bob Dole's up by 8 points. And then John Sununu, with a computer background, brings into Manchester for the first time these computerized computer voting machines. And, of course, the former CIA director, George Herbert Walker Bush, then wins by 9 points, a 17-point shift from the last poll the weekend before the election. And, of course, American media, the Washington Post, calls it an unexplained groundswell. Giving rise in places like Ohio. We have a saying here, Webster, that it's never over till the cyber vote comes in.
So this is the redshift, not the redshift of astronomy and cosmology, but the redshift that the votes reported are always more favorable to a reactionary Republican than whatever the polls say.
Yeah, it's interesting. Our analysis of 2004, which we put in various books, what happened in Ohio, a new press book we did, but in 2004, the red shift miraculously only occurs in battleground states, and it all goes in one direction. 10 of the 11 battleground states, all except Wisconsin, which had same-day voting. There's no shift. And the other 10 states, they're all outside the margin of error. So the exit polls are right in all the states that are overwhelmingly blue and overwhelmingly red, but they're wrong in the battleground states where they're outside the margin of error. And that would occur about 1 in every 900 79,000 elections, which occur every 4 years. So you would expect something like that to occur naturally in about a 3.5 to 4 million year period.
Now, you've told us about 2004. On this program, we have tried, using the means we have, to cover the 2012 election and the so-called Orca devices, right? The Orca, whatever this was. You're going to tell us, I hope, that Karl Rove had put into place, in which he had ready to go on the night of the election. And many people would say the reason that Karl Rove was reluctant to concede Ohio and other states at the end was that he was waiting for those Orca computers and servers to fake the results. Can you give us an idea? Because this seems to suggest that this entire method can be defeated. At least it may be.
Well, the Orca, which was associated with the Romney campaign, and also was associated with a dual program here with the Secretary of State, John Husted, in Ohio, who I brought a federal lawsuit that was thrown out immediately by a judge, but a state judge actually allowed us to keep that open until the numbers came in. But what it is, in their new game, when they stole the election in 2004, what they did is it was very sloppy. We've got a guy who was there who briefed some people thinking they were allies, and we had a Free Press reporter there. Was Ken Blackwell drawing numbers on county maps? We need 10,000 votes in Miami more. We need 20,000 in Butler County. So what happened, as you recall, in Clyde, Ohio, there was 131% vote return. Is that in two precincts in Perry County, there was 124% and 121%. In order to get those numbers at the county level, they were running over. But what Orca does...
Hold the thought, Bob. Hold the thought. The music is automatic, and I don't control it, so we're going to have to come back in a minute and get the rest of the story. But it's fascinating. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley from Washington, D.C., and we're having a fascinating conversation with Robert Fitrakis, Professor Bob Fitrakis of Ohio, who is he's kind of the reference point for every progressive cause in the critical battleground state of Ohio, and above all, expert in vote fraud and how to fight it and how to prevent it. Bob, before we go any further, you're referring to the freepress.org. And why don't you tell us how people can keep in touch with your work directly and how they can help you, if that's possible?
Yeah, if the freepress.org is a nonprofit 501c3, so you can go online, go to the store, and donate and help us out there and get a tax write-off as well. And we've won numerous awards for our reporting, which stuff you would think people would report on because it's obvious. We're the ones that, found out that Romney's family and friends had bought Hart Intercivic voting machine in 2012, for example. So I would encourage you to go to freepress.org. A lot of interesting stuff there, not only on Ohio politics, but national politics, and also a variety of books. One called Spooks, Nukes, and Nazis, which shows the Bush apparatus, George Herbert Walker Bush, in Ohio, tied to the Voinovich administration when he was governor here, and all sorts of interesting buildings development and money laundering in this state. So I appreciate you allowing me to mention the Free Press.
Oh, absolutely. And people should take that seriously. In other words, there's got to be a defense against vote fraud, and that requires people on the ground. But you're telling us 131% turnout, 124%, 121%. Maybe you go back and take up that narrative where we left off.
Yeah, it was really sloppy how they, outsourced and rigged the election in Ohio in 2004. Orca, and there's two other elements of this we should be concerned with, was essentially a precinct-by-precinct level in real time. So now they know exactly who has voted in these key swing states like Ohio and their preference. So it allows you to more plausibly, at the precinct level, instead of just, jamming through an extra 10,000 votes that's going to put you over in certain areas, it allows you to essentially micro-vote people that aren't voting, people that would be Republicans or independents that leaned Republican. And going along with that is a system in Ohio called election night reporting. In 20 counties, they put on experimental patches in 2012, secretly coded software patches, supposedly to allow the media to get better information at the precinct level. Now, our expert testimony, a man who had worked for the NSA for 37 years and saw the light and decided, had turned libertarian and decided the government shouldn't be doing what it was doing, a man named Michael Donahoe, came forward and said, look, all you need to do is put this on the Secretary of State's site. Why would you be putting this on the county central tabulator site? Why would private ES&S, a private company, go in and secretly code, and they were coding, not so surprisingly, only the large urban counties, Cleveland, Columbus, Toledo. And you also have another problem with a group called Seidel. Your listeners should be aware of Seidel. They're the one that counts the military vote overseas as well as Americans living abroad. And some states give Seidel direct. It's a Barcelona-based company.
Barcelona, Spain.
Yes, the autonomous university. The man who created the software died tragically in a single car accident at 32. Now it appears people like George Tenet and actually George Allen just took a $40 million stake in these companies. But if you look at Benchmark, these venture funds that have people like George Tenet in it, and IQTEL. One of the people they're working with is the nonprofit of the CIA. They openly admit it. IQTEL. Hi, we're the CIA's nonprofit.
I think some people know it as InQTEL, but that's it. That's the one that they use.
Yeah, InQTEL is being used in this situation. So you've got a whole group of venture capitalists that are going to make a ton of money, and you're essentially going to allow a country based in Barcelona, Spain, to count the American vote. And there's enough votes there to swing any close election, particularly in the battleground states.
Okay, it's absolutely dramatic. But please, how was it stopped? I mean, why didn't it work according to Karl Rove's plan?
Well, certain people, and it's not the free press, I want to make that clear. I think we've perhaps entered an era of hack and counter-hack.
Yes.
Certain people that, knew this was going on, I think took matters into their own hands and, attempted and may have been successful in disabling that software.
I thought I saw something similar in the 2008 New Hampshire primary, where it looked to me like there was some kind of a fraud attempt by the Obama people that was answered by something similar from the Hillary camp. But let's just focus now.
Let me just say, I've talked to Hillary, and Hillary is very well. When I was working in the Rainbow Coalition, trying to bring this to Congress, she's very well versed, as was John Kerry. John Kerry knew they beat him by hacking the election. He just didn't have enough guts to stand up to these people.
He didn't have the guts. Now, concerning just to shift now to the future, for the congressional election this year, and of course for the all-important presidential one, what are you doing, and how can people assist what you're doing to try to set up a kind of a people's barrier against vote fraud?
Well, one of the things we do at the Free Press is we've actually had people all over the United States we haven't had trouble convincing people at MIT and or Berkeley that you can hack computers. So we've used graduate students, volunteers, and they actually monitor. And we have certain programs. We monitor the computers in Ohio, particularly the county mainframes, because you'll find interesting stuff like suddenly third-party candidates will have 10,000 votes when they're only getting 700 in the whole state. It's like they're parking votes and shifting them, and sometimes these computers will freeze up. In the state, we actually have flying squads of computer experts and attorneys when, for example, in Warren County, which notoriously diverted all its ballots to a warehouse and called a level 10 Homeland Security alert without any mention of a terrorist being in the state, let alone in Warren County. We actually send groups of people to the boards of elections and demand to know what's going on. Usually we've made the point by the time the police arrive to arrest us.
And, of course, could it be applied now to the congressional election? Do you see anything in that regard? It's clearly the technology can be applied to any election, but in key elections, with progressive people and that are willing to stand up to Wall Street, we can, in fact, and we have, assisted in making sure those elections are clean, at least in our state. And we'd encourage people to do this in other states as well. All right. I'm afraid we've run out of time. That's the music. I wanted to ask you about how you and others were able to defeat Kucinich with that referendum, which stands as a somewhat neglected monument of how to do these things. We hope to get you back in the very near future, Bob. Thank you so much.
Good.
And we'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to our second hour of World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley reporting from Washington, D.C. on Friday the 13th of June. Now, we've just had the great political earthquake in Virginia. The majority leader of the House of Representatives, the reactionary Republican Eric Cantor, defeated in a surprise upset in his local primary. The winner is somebody named David Bratt. Now, who is Bratt? Well, Randolph-Macon College and all this, but the main thing is he is a Protestant fundamentalist of the new kind, of the Ben Sass variety, and he is somebody who operates from a Calvinist or sometimes tinged with Lutheranism. These two are not really different except in some of their political attitudes, which we can go into. But Bratt, according to the roll call Capitol Hill paper that we have here, Bratt, some years back, 2005, attacked helicopter Ben Bernanke of the Federal Reserve, saying that Bernanke's problem was that he overlooked the role that religious institutions, particularly Protestant ones, play in driving a country's growth rates. Protestantism, according to Bratt, quote, provides an efficient set of property rights and encourages a modern set of economic incentives so one can anticipate positive economic performance. And then he says, give me a country in 1600 that had a Protestant-led contest for religious and political power, and I will show you a country that is rich today. Max Weber's Protestant ethic rides again, but this, now that we have a pattern from Sass to Bratt and mysterious donors coming in, we're going to try to name some names. It looks like we're dealing with a pattern, and it looks like it's dangerous. The other thing about them, of course, they hate the Pope, they hate Pope Francis and Catholic social doctrine. There's no such thing as social justice for these people. So for this, we'd like to welcome, first of all, Daniela Walls of the Tax Wall Street Party, and Kyle McCarthy in Illinois of the also of the Tax Wall Street Party. So we'll have them joining us right now. Welcome.
Hi, Webster.
Hi,
Hello
Webster.
there.
Thanks for having us.
And Kyle. Okay, so I know you two have been cooperating on some rather important research about this, so I would like to give it to you. You take it away, and let's see where it leads. We got about 20 minutes all told.
Okay, great. Before we get into this wild brat and canter stuff, I just want to say that we now out in Nebraska have room to house people. The biggest band in Lincoln just offered to play a benefit for Dan. We're getting a lot of local, isn't that cool? Yeah, we're getting a lot of local interest and support, but we also need volunteers to help get the rest of our petition signatures. We need volunteers to come out to Nebraska if they can and help us get the rest of these signatures. If you want to come volunteer, please write to me at taxwallstreetparty@gmail.com. If you want to visit Nebraska, we can chat about that again at taxwallstreetparty@gmail.com. If you can't come and visit, then please consider maybe making a contribution at danfornebraska.com. Also, an immense thanks to those who have already donated and those who are already on their way to Nebraska. You guys know who you are, and thank you so much.
So don't go to the seashore. The seashore is passé. Europe is passé. You want to go to the countryside, and you want to go to the deep heartland of America, and that's Nebraska.
The seashore is passé. Come to Nebraska. So Dave Bratt just defeated Eric Cantor. The media story is the victory of independent populism over the Republican establishment, Webster. But the real story, Kyle and I think, here is the birth of a new strategy to install an austerity dictatorship.
And we've been doing a lot of research before this on Ben Sass, but it turns out that Sass and Bratt are like the same guy.
Like twins.
Amazing.
Right.
Tell us how.
They're these supposed unknowns who, everyone's telling us, oh, no one saw this coming. They launched their campaigns from small-town religious colleges. They have this elite academic and professional background, and they do it with the support of the right-wing media. And as we'll talk about the religious.
I'd like you to I think listeners have an idea about SAS being the interface of the CIA, the FBI, and the Department of Justice. Now, the elite background on Bratt, give us that.
And do you want me to, Danielle? I don't know if I should run through that.
Go right through it. Let's hear it.
Okay. Well, I think what we're going to focus on today is his dangerous religious outlook.
And
Kyle,
we'll give you the quick summary of Bratt.
Summary, one line, I think.
Academically, he has an undergrad from Hope College, which is kind of like a Calvinist college in Holland, Michigan. He gets a Master of Divinity from Princeton Theological Seminary, and then a PhD in economics from American University. And he has these published works with titles like Can Theological Types Handle Usury and Capitalism, and an analysis of the moral foundations of Ayn Rand. And he goes, he has an interesting professional resume, too, that involves the World Bank, USAID, Arthur Andersen, a lot of these similar government institutions, NGOs, and some Wall Street institutions just like that.
And I think also the Army Research Center or Army Research Institute, that's got to be something nefarious. Yeah. And the Cato Institute, of course, paid for by the Koch brothers initially, and the main center for libertarians. Let me just also add, the Princeton Theological Seminary is the starting point for fundamentalism in the sense that they are the ones who many decades ago put out a series of papers called The Fundamentals, meaning the common basis of what they call Christianity. I would call it something else, but the fundamentals, in other words, it sounds like it might be Eastern and liberal, but it's fundamentalist.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll get into Princeton. I think the best term for what we're dealing with here is theocratic libertarianism. On the left,
all right.
Some people are going to be worried by the fact that these guys are unabashed Christians, but that's really not it. As you say, they're very anti-Catholic. I think we're looking at a wildly anti-Christian doctrine. Webster, I don't know if you remember this, you did a Christmas show a couple of years ago where you talked about the significance of Christ coming into the world and what that meant for, humans, for the duty of humans to develop the world. I think Sass and Bratt and this whole school thinks that God
austerity is the antithesis of anything that Christ preached in the Gospels.
Right. And Sass and Bratt think that God hates humanity and that Christ is like a human sacrifice to save this select group of Calvinist from damnation.
Which, of course, is the Calvin view, and it's the Jonathan Edwards view, right? The sinner's in the hands of an angry God. God hates you, and he's just about to pitch you into the inferno. Do something quick.
Right, and just like the Puritans in the 1600s that, paved the way for the British and Dutch empires, this whole thing, I think, it's an excuse to loot the population. It's just a pretext.
People think that Obama is the fascist, but we say get ready for Sass and Brat, because this is real historical fascism, Webster. Like, as Upton Sinclair said, fascism wrapped in a flag, the cross. And it's funny because the media can't figure out what to do with Brat. He talks about Christian capitalism, and his PhD dissertation argues that industrialization, scientific advancement, and economic prosperity are all thanks to Calvinism's victory over the Catholic Church. And remember, in Brat's acceptance speech, he credits God to his primary win. And under that speech, I saw a big truck driver commenting on YouTube. He said, "Only a courageous man speaks about his faith in public." And that made me afraid now people will get tricked by Sass and Brat and project their own values onto them.
And even the progressives are tricked. I saw John Nichols in The Nation was calling him an enemy of crony capitalism, and some are calling him the Republican Elizabeth Warren, and there are a lot of David and Goliath references being tossed around.
That is, I think, because Brat in his campaigning did have things to say about Wall Street and banks. Can you fill us in on that?
Yeah, but Brat
and we'll have to have that in the next segment. The music is on, and we'll be right back on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So we're looking at this strange coincidence that Ben Sass in Nebraska and Brat in Virginia, the guy who just knocked off Eric Cantor, both of them have got this theocratic libertarian profile. Some adjectives applied to them. We hope to hear about Christian Reconstructionism or Dominionism. But the thing I think is important to focus on is that Brat mixed in a heavy dose of demagogy, anti-bank, anti-Wall Street. Tell us about it.
Kyle just made reference to David and Goliath, and I just want to say real quick that Brat and Sass are the Goliaths here. They owe their victories to the support of a right-wing media cabal funded by Wall Street through PACs and foundations. Like Glenn Beck does softball interviews with both Sass and Brat right before the election because I want to say he's being paid millions of dollars to do it. And all these right-wing so-called populist hosts are in on it. Beck, Limbaugh, Hannity, Laura Ingraham, Mark Levin. Both Sass and Brat get feature stories in the National Review. There's no such treatment like in the primary for Shane Osborne in the primary in Nebraska, despite his support among the establishment. So the fix is in. A real outsider like our candidate Dan Burdorf doesn't have Sean Hannity and Mark Levin fawning over him and in love because we're not paying them to do it. And this is why Brat won. This is my case. That's why Brat won. It wasn't $138,000. That wasn't the main issue. Brat didn't need a big war chest because he had big media, which is pay to play, like the Senate Conservative Fund and Freedom Works and the Heritage Foundation pay Beck and Limbaugh millions annually for endorsements and for attack campaigns on people like Eric Cantor and for softball interviews with Brat and Sass. You name it. So I just want to say that.
Webster, on the issue of Brat attacking banks and attacking Wall Street, it's kind of the same profile that like a Rand Paul would have, where it's just more of a rhetorical opposition, but it's not like he has any sort of programmatic alternative to this. And
of course, I guess it focuses on this bailout. He's attacking Cantor for voting for the 2008 bailout.
Yeah, and I think he mobilized even a lot of Democrats in the district because it was an open primary to come out and vote against Cantor. So we'll see if he can even win the general election. And speaking of, Danielle was talking about this pay-to-play thing. You have to wonder how deep it goes. I read Kurt Nimmo at InfoWars had this story yesterday called "Democrats Waste No Time Attacking Dave Brat," and he subtitles it, "Libertarianism, especially when infused with Christianity, is violently rejected in Washington."
But these are incompatible.
I thought last week that InfoWars would come out for these insiders like they did for Rand Paul. It's a shame.
All right. But look, the question now is, in Nebraska, if Sass is running on this, and maybe I think we're learning things about Sass through Brat and vice versa, the percentage of Catholic voters in Nebraska is surprisingly high. And 25%. To the extent that these characters, Sass and Bratt, apparently believe that the Pope is the Antichrist, and this entire idiotic catalog of insults, right? Isn't that going to create some problems there for Sass?
Well, and that's Sass is a director of this thing called the Westminster Seminary in California that we can get to. Actually, comes out of the Princeton Theological Seminary. And their founding document is the Westminster Confession of Faith. This is from like 1643, where the Scottish Protestants are trying to reform the Church of England. One big part of this is this idea of double predestination, where they say, by the decree of God, some men and angels are predestinated unto everlasting life, and others foreordained to everlasting death. And it's kind of the idea being that no sins nor good works on your part can change your fate. It's all been pre-planned by God. But then you mentioned with the Catholics, the other quote in this, and remember that Sass has to sign on to this document as a board member of the seminary. There's no other head of the...
the Pope is the Antichrist.
It says there's no other head of the Church but the Lord Jesus Christ, nor can the Pope of Rome in any sense be head thereof, but is that Antichrist, that man of sin and son of perdition. This is a fundamental part of Calvinism.
So the Republican senatorial candidate in Nebraska he's on record signing a declaration that the Pope is the Antichrist.
Yes.
Won't those voters be interested to hear that?
Webster, Sass is the director of this Westminster Theological Seminary, which is also connected to his Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals. So he signed a document stating that the Pope is the Antichrist. And 25% of the state, like I said, is Catholic.
This goes back to
they will be interested to hear that.
You just need to be told.
You talked about Christian Reconstructionism. This comes out of the Princeton Theological Seminary when this group of Orthodox Presbyterians just basically thinks that Princeton is too modern. And they found the Westminster Theological Seminary, which, Sass is now involved with. One of the founders is this guy named Cornelius Van Til, who's a Dutch Calvinist. And the core idea of this guy, which gets taken up later, is that because God is perfect, any knowledge not derived from the Bible is quote, sinful, invalid nonsense. The question
is, how do they combine Jesus with their new free market capitalism?
I think the idea that they bring in is that the state itself is, because it's a product of human reason and human decision-making, is an affront to God. And, the idea gets popularized by this guy, R.J. Rushdoony, and people should Google this guy. He's pretty wild. And he combines Calvinism not just with Austrian economics, but gets into stuff like, he's an extreme racist. He talks about stoning homosexuals and disobedient children. He's a big proponent of homeschooling.
Sass is a proud Christian homeschooler. Well, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not, what do you suppose will happen to the public school system under his watch is the question.
These are, of course, very, very serious and shocking things. Just from a political point of view, even 120 years ago in the United States, I'm thinking of a Republican candidate who was defeated because he went around yelling about Romanism and rebellion, and the Romanism was the Catholic Church, and that sealed his doom in a couple of key states. I also recommend, if people want to get a kind of a lighthearted perspective on this stuff, there's a nice little poem by Robert Burns of Scotland, right? And we're concerned about Scotland. We hope they don't make some terrible mistake here in the next few months. But it's called Holy Willie's Prayer. And Holy Willie is a Calvinist divine of the Church of Scotland, right? Presbyterian. And he's saying, we know, God, that you damned all of us, or so many of us, all those eons ago without any input from us. So obviously this is irrational. This is the reduction of religion to absurdity. And those twin doctrines of absolute depravity and total predestination, they leave very little space for what a lot of people would consider to be Christianity. All right, I'm afraid we seem to be out of time already.
You can contact me at taxwallstreetparty@gmail, danfornebraska.com. Thanks, Webster.
That's right. We're making a permanent appeal to people go and help Dan to get the signatures, because we'll never be able to expose Sass in particular if Dan Berdorf is not on that ballot. So help us with that. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. So far we've heard from the anti-vote fraud front in Ohio and this extremely interesting question of Sass and Brat as quite possibly here spin-offs of the same network with the same theological profile, right? Attempting to take the sort of mainline Protestants, right? Presbyterians, Calvinists, and Lutherans, and instead of having those in the sort of liberal, middle-of-the-road form, whatever you want to call it, that they've had, to try to mobilize them to join with the more extreme charismatic fundamentalist, Pentecostalists, and evangelicals to try to reform some version of the moral majority or the Elmer Gantrys, the Holy Rollers, whatever you like. And this, I think, is dangerous. So if you're interested in doing something about that, then it's Dan Berdorf in Nebraska. But now, I think we can take you to the sidewalks of New York, and this is the Credico campaign. Randy Credico, and remember, this is an important national question also. Will there be an opposition against the Wall Street puppet Andrew Cuomo in the New York Democratic primary and beyond? And the only way to do that is with Randy Credico. Randy, are you there?
Yes. Hi. How are you, Webster?
Welcome. Now, look, what I'd like you to do today, if you could, is to focus on what a lot of people don't know: why Cuomo is so bad. In other words, why he's so dangerous. I would say, along with Schumer and Durbin and a few others, he is one of the pillars of the Wall Street control of the Democratic Party. But you tell us all about it.
Well, that's true. He, his biggest bundler of campaign contributions is Alphonse D'Amato, Senator D'Amato, who runs this organization called Park Strategies, and he's connected to all Wall Street, the nuclear, all of the gas industry, everything. He's got his hands in everything. So he bundles money for him, casino industry, and he's got the most access to Cuomo. The other one is Lloyd Blankfein from Goldman Sachs, and his crew bundle money for Cuomo. And then again, Leonard Letwin, the number one real estate man in New York City, who nobody knows, he was able to circumvent the $50,000 cap somehow, giving him $900,000. And then you have the Koch brothers, the nefarious Koch brothers, who is everyone's enemy, I suppose. He gave Cuomo more money, the Koch brothers, than they gave Rick Scott in Florida. So, and you have a number of other characters, Jamie Dimon, that have contributed. Ken Langone is like chairman of Republicans for Cuomo. So if you just look at where the money is coming from and who it's going to, you just have to make the connection that he is doing their bidding. They're not doing it because they want to build social programs. They're not doing this because they want to build hospitals and create jobs. They're doing it for other reasons. They're doing it so they can have...
Can you just... That guy, Letwin, can you spell him? Because I've never heard of him. You were right.
Nobody has. He's 96 years old, maybe even older. Leonard Letwin, Litwin. He's the number one real estate guy for many years. He also put $900,000 into the Senate Republican war chest. And because of the $900,000, they control the Senate, even though there's only 29 Republicans and 33 Democrats. But the Republicans control the state Senate because 4 Democrats broke off, called the Independent Democratic Caucus, that are connected to Cuomo, because he's closer to the Republicans' position on rolling back the social programs and not taxing Wall Street, etc. And in fact, they just in the last budget, the small bank tax was taken out, and the millionaires tax, of course, he eliminated in 2011. That's why he was dubbed by Occupy Wall Street as Governor 1%, going way back to then.
So I guess we can say that Cuomo is stands exposed. Now, the question is, the way I understand it, you're the only hope of anybody getting on the ballot to challenge him and expose him.
So far, there's a woman that ran against him in the Working Family, which is not a party, by the way. It's the Democratic Party's handmaiden, the Working Families Party. They have supported Schumer, Carl McCall, all the Wall Street boys. They have supported every year in every election, Working Families Party. But they have that cachet as being some progressive party that supports progressive causes. But they really, if you look deep, it's really a tugboat for the Democratic Party. And they did have a convention a couple of weeks back, and some woman entered the race late, and Cuomo had to use everything he could to stop her from actually getting the endorsement. 58 to 42%. The White House called up, everybody called up the big unions that control the Working Families Party. But the big unions that control, they got mollified by Cuomo. 3 or 4 of them with special deals, and he was able to arm wrestle the opposition to a defeat, 58 to 42. And her name is Zephyr Teachout, and she's got a platform very similar to mine. I don't know about the Occupy Wall Street. I mean the Taxi Wall Street. I'll be speaking to her as soon as this show is over. She finally reached out to me. She now is considering running primary against Cuomo. She's thinking about running in the primary against Cuomo. So there would be 2 people here that have a FDR-style program, attacks Wall Street. Hopefully, if she were able to generate a lot of money and she were to take on my positions, particularly the leitmotif of my campaign is the taxing Wall Street and a bank tax. Reinstituting the bank tax and the stock transfer tax, which we have that's immediately refunded in this state. As soon as they put it in, they get it right back. And so bridges and tolls are going up. MTA, subway fares have gone up. There's a lot of lotto games, cigarette taxes, all these regressive taxes to make up for where the money should be coming from, and that is from the thieves of the planet, and that's Wall Street. And so we got to keep hammering away at this theme here, and that's the theme until people start picking it up. I mean, you've been, sent out the clarion call for it for a long time now, and it's got me repeating what you're saying, and a lot of people are jumping on board. It really is the only way we can fix the mess that we're in. Absolutely, and of course, if Miss Teachout is interested, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. But I would recommend hang tough on the 1% Wall Street sales tax, serious stuff. In other words, not some tiny thing that goes for the Penguins and the Pelicans, but something that's going to help working people in the city. Now, that is not to be bargained away. The 1% sales tax. Is if that's not, I wouldn't bargain that away for anything. Okay. Now, and more power to you, right? Because what you're doing is courageous, and you can imagine, right, going up against the New York Democratic machine. This is not a picnic. So, it really isn't. I was in Albany yesterday, and these guys get real nervous. One guy signed my petition, a big consultant up there, because he hates Cuomo. And then last night he sent me an email asking me to strike it out because he's afraid he'll be retaliated against. He'll be leaned on. They'll send a delegation to his house. But now, when is the deadline for the signatures, and how many do you have, and how can people help? We got half of what we need at the minimum right now. We're 2 weeks in. We got 4 weeks left, and people need to help out. I'm here with a big supporter of yours, Chris. And it's Credico 2014. We're running out of time. Credico 2014, right? Yes, that's it. Okay, so go to Credico. It's Credico2014.com and get in there against Cuomo. See you very soon, Randy. And keep up the good work. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. And unless I miss my count, this is the last of our segments this afternoon. So what I think we get out of this program is the evolution of the ruling class machinery
of social control, and that is true in regard to the vote fraud issue and in regard to the Manchurian candidates that are put up for the highest offices, especially the presidency. I think one of the things that Bob Petrakis was talking about here, hack and counter-hack, it seems to me that is where we are now. That is what happened, according to most accounts, in November of 2012, that there was this Orca network, servers, computers, activity with the Romney campaign, with Karl Rove and his super PACs and so forth, and that Orca was supposed to deliver a computer-operated vote fraud. And that was apparently defeated by some counterforce that shut down those servers and prevented that from happening. And, of course, the people who said they had done it called themselves anonymous. But, of course, anonymous, precisely because it's anonymous, can be anybody. That can be a special, pro-Obama group operating out of Bangalore, India, right? Barcelona is far away. When Obama first ran in 2008, indications are he had paid bloggers trying to create groundswell of hysteria on the Internet by going into chat rooms and comment pages and systematically trumpeting Obama and counterattacking everybody else. So that seems to be what happened. And if you go and look at my book, Obama, the Postmodern Coup, The Making of a Manchurian Candidate, I think you're going to find one of the chapters is about coup and counter-coup in New Hampshire, that there was one set up for Obama to pump up his results and another set up to stuff the ballot box in favor of Hillary. And in that case, it looked to me like the older and more traditional, the cruder form prevailed on the ground, right, allowing Mrs. Clinton to win the New Hampshire primary against Obama. But, of course, she had not realized the degree to which Obama was going to game the rest of the primary process. So what this shows us is that, as Bob Petrakis is well aware, the evolution of this entire system, it's always changing. It keeps pace with technology. Very interesting that he went from 1988 on. In my Bush biography, I have the comment that the Manchester Union leader in 1980 said that the Bush campaign looked like a CIA covert operation. Right? God knows what it included. Right? In those cases, it was largely a matter of bribery of certain key voters. Then on the other side, the question of what to look for to identify a Manchurian candidate. And here now with the Sass and Brat, what we're seeing is perhaps a more complex, articulated method of promoting these candidates. Up to now, we have been focused on the idea that Sass and Tom Cotton of Arkansas were kind of Siamese twins. In other words, that they were twin deployments. Remember, the classic one is Jimmy Carter of Georgia, and then Reuben Askew, governor of Florida. And we have the testimony of none other than Zbigniew Brzezinski that they were favoring Carter, but they also were prepared to give critical support to Reuben Askew. So the idea is you have a spare, right? One of them may get defeated, right? These people can't control everything. That's infantile to think that they can. But then, automobile accidents, drug overdoses, arrests, marital squabbles, scandals that really come out of nowhere. Those are always a problem. So you've got to have a spare because you're investing huge amounts of money in creating the proper atmosphere for a candidate to come in. So Sass and Cotton of Arkansas, based on the elite resume, right, the super elite, Harvard, Yale, Oxford, whatever they all have. And this was pointed out by an article in the New York Times. So this was fairly obvious that Sass and Cotton were being advertised to the ruling class, Wall Street, as a kind of a dynamic duo. But now we see that the dynamic duo is maybe too simplistic. Now we see brat coming in who maybe doesn't have the super elite credentials in the resume, but he's got this other thing going on, which is this revival of Calvinism and Lutheranism. It's almost 500 years since Martin Luther on Halloween posted his theses on the door of the Wittenberg Cathedral. Yes, indeed, October 31st, 1517, and that's the beginning of Protestantism in that form. And I have a lot to say about that, involving Venice and Savonarola and much else. But just for now, 500 years, it's an attempt to refurbish this and to get to the permanent austerity dictatorship, for which you've got to have union busting, for which you've got to have vote fraud. And again, here, Ohio is an obvious showcase of these policies. And then the idea of somehow remobilizing the mainstream Protestant denominations, the ones that have generally been liberal. And this included idea that you're going to be going against the Roman Pope. Now, whether they knew, they'd be dealing with Pope Francis and the wonderful series of prophetic gestures that he's been making to revitalize the Christian social doctrine, the Catholic social doctrine. That is hard to tell. But the fact is, here we are with people coming forward for Calvinism and Lutheranism, again with this total depravity and absolute predestination lurking in the background. The Pope is the Antichrist. And the interesting question of usury, because usury, of course, is certainly frowned on and more or less forbidden in real Christianity. And it's people like Calvin who say, no, you can take what the market will bear. In the English-speaking world, I would focus on John Milton, the poet from England, part of a Venetian network, went over there, a great admirer of the Venetians, in touch with them his entire life. And his father, of course, was a scrivener. And to be a scrivener means to be a moneylender. Not a big one, rather a small one, but usury was part of the mother's milk for John Milton in Paradise Lost and so forth. So who otherwise was a religious kook, if you look at his beliefs about divorce, polygamy. He's in favor of polygamy, and some other things. So we've got to sharpen our intelligence analysis to realize that we may be dealing not just with a dynamic duo in the sense of Carter Askew or Obama and Deval Patrick of Massachusetts, but now it's going to be something more complex. And certainly, let me just end on the note that the events in Iraq are designed to shock. They are designed to start bombing campaigns. Those bombing campaigns might begin in Iraq, in central Iraq, along those roads, Highway number 1. They can easily spread into Syria. You can easily parlay that. You can always say, hey, we've bombed them back to the Syrian border, but now there are sanctuaries, and we will not allow privileged sanctuaries. And God help us, you can do the same thing on the Iranian side of the border. You can say this is coming from Iran, and therefore we've got to bomb Iran to get rid of it. And in the meantime, McCain wants Petraeus, General Keane, Mattis, and Crocker to take over the foreign defense and security policy of the United States. Sounds like a coup. And the Bergdahl stuff was, as I argued, the prelude to this. So we'll be back with you next week on World Crisis Radio. That is the command structure. Goes back to these Saudis. So the idea is a joint operation. We have to be careful with this now. See, we just do the ones that we know are immediately involved. Is the United States, certainly, France, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey are indispensable for the operation that we're seeing. So the Islamic Emirate of Iraq and the Levant, or ISIS, in Arabic it sounds like Daesh or something similar. This is now sweeping across northern Iraq. And just like the Guderian episode, you have to ask yourself, of these military units that are melting away, how many are doing that deliberately? How many have been bribed? The U.S. has been bribing Iraqi generals going back to the first Gulf War of the 1991. And remember that Guderian's success was not all due to Guderian, but to the fact that General Hunsiger and General George and some other of the French generals that were facing the Ardennes breakout, a lot of those were defeatists. A lot of those were Vichy within a couple of weeks. A lot of those were people who said, better Hitler than Léon Blum of the French Popular Front. You get the idea. In other words, the political quality of those troops means a lot. And since that force was bribed and created by the United States, we really have to wonder why they are melting away so fast. At any rate, what we're seeing, therefore, is a planned destabilization. And we've got now this idea that a vast zone of terrorist rebels stretching from the... Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley reporting from Washington, D.C. It's the early afternoon of Friday the 13th of June, 2014. And we're watching these little arrows indicating the spearheads of the ISIS brigades move across northern Iraq under the command, of course, of the new Guderian al-Baghdadi. The difference, of course, being that this time it's largely an imposture. It is to a significant degree, a dog and pony show, which unfortunately threatens to go very real. Baghdadi, like so many others, like Kumu in Libya, like Shihi or Shiri in Yemen, Baghdadi is a graduate of the U.S. military prison camp system. As a matter of fact, he got a 4-year degree. Baghdadi was held in Camp Bokka from 2005 to 2009. And if you look earlier this week, in a rather timely way, I must say, I have an interview from last Saturday morning with Press TV precisely on this, that Guantanamo Bay is a training school. It's a military academy for terrorists. And let the same be said for places like Abu Ghraib and Camp Bokka and other such places. So Baghdadi, the previous founder of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, now the founder of, or the boss of ISIS. Now, concerning ISIS, this is actually a misnomer. It's really Islamic Emirate of Iraq and Sham, okay? So Islam and Sham, of course, what the Arabic eastern suburbs of Aleppo to the western and northern suburbs of Baghdad have now fallen under this ISIS. This is now the reason that's being given for all sorts of shocking developments. Obama just made a statement on television, getting ready to fly off to a meeting in California with American Indian activists, and he wants to go slow. And I would commend that. I would commend going slow. Being impetuous and trying to cater to the likes of John McCain will get you nowhere. I would recommend for people, take a look at the short article that's available on the Voltaire Network, Iraq under attack by U.S., France, Saudi Arabia. Again, Turkey is indispensable in this, and the other one about how it's this Prince Rahman, I guess we can call him, Prince Abdul Rahman Al Faisal, ARF. Arf, arf, arf. Abdul Rahman al-Faisal is actually the commander, and then his military guy is Baghdadi, 4-year degree from Camp Bokka. And you'll notice the entire coverage is anti-Maliki. The U.S. hates Maliki. Why? Maliki is a friend of Iran. Maliki is a satellite of Iran. And remember, going back to WikiLeaks, some of the WikiLeaks documents were designed to make Maliki look bad. Why? To make Alawi look good. Iyad Alawi, the eternal U.S. candidate to be the dictator of an anti-Iranian Iraq. That's Alawi. And yesterday on CNN, we had the ineffable Amanpour boasting that she had been talking on the phone with Alawi or meeting him in person in London. And he recommends a national unity government. So the idea is if this emergency is used to create a national unity government, that would then correspond to a weakening of the pro-Iranian side and a strengthening of the U.S., British, NATO puppet side. And that is, of course, possible. The Iranians are responding. The Quds Force, elite troops of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, are reportedly intervening in northern Iraq to shut down these characters, because it's clear, as soon as ISIS meets serious military resistance, they're going to be revealed as just a bunch of crazies riding around in pickup trucks with machine guns on the back. So that is the idea. We'll be back in just a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Yesterday, the 12th of June, was the day of Russia, the Russian National Day, equivalent to the U.S. July 4th, the French July 14th, and so on down the line. A very nice reception at the Russian embassy. Just two things to note. The churls, the ill-bred, dishonorable churls of the State Department did not send, as far as I could see, anybody there to congratulate Russia. And the D.C. police let a bunch of pro-Ukrainian demonstrators get very close to the door, and these characters had the gall to say if you were going into the Russian reception, you were a fascist. How about that? The pot calling the kettle black. Not only are they fascists, they're actually Nazis. Forget about fascists. The people supporting the right sector and so forth in Ukraine qualify as absolute neo-Nazis. So I don't see what happens here with the D.C. Police Department. We'll be looking into that. The other thing I would mention, take a look at C-SPAN. My research indicates that that lecture that I did at the National Press Club September of last year is now the most popular Civil War item in the C-SPAN video library, going back to 2001. The only one in the entire history of C-SPAN, the only item which seems to have more for the Roman province of Syria. So Islamic Emirate of Iraq and Syria, if you will, IEIS. But let's go along with the normal usage. ISIS is easier and quicker to say, and people tuning in late will get the idea. So what is this? Well, we have, of course, been following the existence of death squads in this critical area, Mesopotamia, the Fertile Crescent, over to the Mediterranean, for many years. And it goes back to Negroponte, the architect of the death squads in Central America, moved over to Iraq, and his disciple, Ambassador Ford. So these characters have been working away on that for the past 7 to 8 years or more. And now we're seeing the fruition. Specifically, the overlord, the warlord of the ISIS, Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, another way to put it, but ISIS, the boss of this is Prince Abdul Rahman al-Faisal. And this is not just anybody. Prince Abdul Rahman al-Faisal happens to be the brother of Prince Saud al-Faisal, who is the long-serving foreign minister of Saudi Arabia, and a guy that I knew in college. My heavens, he was He graduated from Princeton in 1966, member of Ivy Club. We never saw him. He was always skiing in Switzerland, of course, but probably had somebody writing his term papers and so forth. But Prince Abdul Rahman Al Faisal is the brother of Saud Al Faisal and of Prince Turki Al Faisal, who has been the Saudi ambassador to the United States, to the United Kingdom, and is a prominent guy. So this is a rather important branch of the Saudi royal family. And